As I prepared for remarriage, Peter looked at me, a trace of irony in his voice. Since I'm getting remarried, it's only fair for you to find a new place to live. The responsibility of the $15,000 loan will now fall on my new partner, he said. I couldn't believe his nerve, handing off a financial obligation I had worked so hard to pay down. Then, I guess those $6,000 monthly payments are now yours to handle, I replied, making sure he understood how much I'd shouldered on my own. Unfazed, I resumed drafting the divorce papers, resolute. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew they would no longer be mine to carry. My name is Sarah, a 43-year-old part-time worker and homemaker. Peter, my soon-to-be ex-husband, is 4 years older, and we've been married for a decade. We met at our old company when I was fully dedicated to my career with little thought for marriage or romance. But at 32, a friend urged me to switch jobs, which led me into a new chapter of my life. Shortly afterward, Peter, a senior colleague from my previous job, confessed his feelings for me. From the start, our relationship was seen through the lens of marriage. Despite my hesitations, we married 3 years later, largely due to family pressure. Peter's parents were very supportive, treating me like a daughter, which helped me settle into married life. A year into our marriage, we built a house together, a symbol of our shared dreams, despite the heavy loan and long-term repayment plan. In those early years, we were a typical working couple, supporting each other's ambitions and managing finances together. But 4 years into the marriage, just as we started talking about having children, Peter announced he was quitting his job to start his own business. A lifelong dream of his, he had hoped to become an entrepreneur by the time he was 41 and had been quietly making connections and saving for it. The news was a shock, as he had already resigned before telling me. It hurt to know he hadn't included me in such a major decision, especially since he expected my income to cover us during his transition. Shortly after launching his business, a family crisis struck. My father-in-law became gravely ill, needing extended hospital care. We quickly realized he wouldn't be able to return home without significant modifications to accommodate his condition. Though my in-laws insisted they could handle it financially, Peter unilaterally decided that we would cover the costs of all the renovations. I wanted to support my family however I could, but taking on all these expenses was daunting. Our household costs soared, and I found myself reeling under the weight of our financial pressures. Peter's business struggled to gain traction, with frequent contract cancellations and few new opportunities. His income had dropped sharply, leaving me to cover our living expenses and the substantial loan payments on my own. Despite the near collapse of his earnings, Peter seemed strangely detached, brushing off my concerns as if the problem was someone else's. As our credit card debt began to mount, Peter continued his nights out, claiming they were essential for building client relationships. With debt piling up and our future clouded by financial strain, I suggested we consider drastic measures, either sell the house or shut down the business. Peter, ever the optimist, waved it off, insisting we just needed to persevere. In reality, we were barely scraping by on my steady income alone. I was shouldering the full weight of our finances, while Peter remained oblivious to the seriousness of our situation. Discussing it felt increasingly futile, as he dismissed my concerns as long as bills were covered on time. Gradually, our conversations faded, and though I knew Peter was seeing other women under the pretense of work, I felt a strange indifference toward him. One evening, after I returned home from work, Peter broke our long-standing silence. Smirking, he tossed a piece of paper onto the table in front of me and announced with smug satisfaction, "I've decided to divorce you. Please sign here." Peter's words, as he handed me the papers, hit with less impact than I expected. I took a deep breath, surprisingly calm, knowing that I'd been considering this step myself if he hadn't gotten there first. "Can we wait a moment? I just got home. Let's sit down in the living room to discuss this," I suggested. "So now you want to talk, but you're just dragging things out?" he replied, irritation lacing his voice. "I don't need pointless chit-chat. Just get it over with." Ignoring his impatience, I walked slowly to the living room, feeling his frustration build. I was determined to pace this final moment on my own terms, after everything else had unfolded on his. Divorce was now inevitable, and the life we had carefully built was slipping away. As I settled on the sofa, I picked up the papers again. They felt fragile in my hands, much like the marriage certificate we had signed 12 years ago, a piece of paper that had once meant so much. "How long are you going to sit there staring at them?" Peter's voice cut through my thoughts, edged with annoyance. I wanted to discuss our plans after the divorce. What do you intend to do? I asked, meeting his eyes. Are you reconsidering? Because I'm committed to moving forward, he replied dismissively. No, I'm not reconsidering, I replied evenly. But I think it's important we talk through the details. I've heard you're planning to remarry. There must be someone new in your life. I imagine she's young, attractive, maybe financially stable. Unlike me, an older woman without children to tie us together. He scoffed. You seem to think poorly of me. Let's be clear. I have always managed our finances carefully, ensuring you never had to worry about a single bill, I said, my voice steady. Despite how much you've taken that for granted. In that moment, I realized that the person in front of me, once central to my life, had already become a stranger. The future I was about to step into felt clearer than ever. I believe I'll be better off without you, I said calmly, feeling an unexpected sense of relief. Honestly, this divorce is a weight lifted. I'll ignore your harsh words as nothing more than frustration from someone who's feeling defeated. There's no more to say, and soon, I won't have to see you again. Please be sure to move out by the end of the week. Actually, I'm leaving today. I can't stand listening to you any longer, Peter replied with a sneer. Oh, and in case you're wondering, my new partner knows about the debts. She's agreed to pitch in $1,000 a month for our living expenses. Should it be too hard for her, unlike it was for you? Once I signed the papers, I gathered the last of my things. I'm leaving immediately. The furniture can stay. Consider it part of the asset division. Feel free to get rid of it if it's useless to you, I said, handing him a note with detailed loan information. You might want to share this with her, I added, giving him a final, steady look. With that, I walked out, got into my car, and drove away from what was once our home. My destination was clear, City Hall, to submit the divorce papers. Relief washed over me, the weight of years finally lifting. As I drove, I realized how much sooner I should have made this choice, and how I'd wasted so much time worrying about him and the financial burdens he'd left behind. A week later, I woke to my phone buzzing insistently. Peter. I'd expected he'd reach out eventually, but the repeated calls were more irritating than anything else. Finally, I answered. I decided to answer the phone. What do you want? I asked, trying to keep my irritation in check. I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't important, he replied, defensive. But, is it true what I heard about the $6,000? I sighed. I have no reason to lie about this. Are you expecting me to cover your debts now? Everything you need to know is in that note I left. I'm calling because I still don't get it, even after reading it, he said, frustration seeping into his voice. Taking a deep breath, I prepared to explain. All right, let me break it down. Besides the mortgage, there are other expenses. The renovation costs for your parents' home, the personal loan for your father's medical bills, the business loan from your venture, and all the credit card debt, all of it in your name. If it were just the mortgage, I might have managed. But there's far more, and now that we're divorced, it's no longer my responsibility. I told you when I left, there's a $6,000 monthly payment due, I reminded him. You spent money recklessly, and now it's catching up to you. Did you ever think about those payments? Well, now they're yours to handle, alongside your new girlfriend. Isn't that why you divorced me in the first place? Actually, she broke up with me, Peter admitted quietly. She said $6,000 a month is too much. I figured as much, I replied. Even someone with a high income would hesitate to take on debt they didn't create. Did your salary increase after you changed jobs? Yes, it increased fivefold, he admitted, but all that extra income goes straight to repayments. It was clear he was finally beginning to realize the weight of what he'd signed up for. I had no idea you were making that much, I said, surprised. If I'd known, I might not have suggested the divorce. It's not like you didn't know, he countered. You just weren't interested. After I changed jobs, you never once asked about my work or my salary. You should have brought it up yourself, I replied. You barely communicated even before you started making more. When you had little to no income, you still spent as if there was no limit. He sighed, frustration evident. Let's start over. Come back to me. I can't, I stated firmly. I finally reclaimed my freedom. But $6,000 a month in payments is unmanageable. Why don't we sell the house? You could use some of your income to pay down the debts, he suggested. Why should I? I responded, my voice calm. I have no part in those debts. I'm not interested in a stranger's financial burdens. "You're incredibly cold," he said, his tone wounded. "Don't you have any empathy?" "Maybe I do seem cold," I replied, "but I've made payments on those debts for over 7 years. At first, it was for love, but then it was out of duty to your parents. You wanted the divorce. You chose this path." I took a deep breath. Technically, I could sell the house, divide our assets, and even file for alimony due to your infidelity. But honestly, I just want my peace. I'm exhausted from covering your reckless spending. My life is finally mine. With that, I ended the call. After our conversation, Peter stopped reaching out. The relief was immense. I later learned he'd lost both his job and the house and had to devise a new repayment plan. Going back to his old job wasn't easy under everyone's scrutiny, and his loan payments remained a constant burden. His parents, unfortunately, had to sell their home and move into a retirement facility. Knowing they wouldn't have had to make such a difficult decision if we hadn't divorced, I decided to help. I assisted with their move and contributed financially to cover the entry fees, a small way to repay the kindness they'd shown me. I genuinely hope they can now find some peace, free from that financial weight. As for me, I've embraced a simpler, frugal lifestyle, and I'm comfortably building my savings. I'm exploring investment options to secure my financial future, and life with my new partner, whom I met after the divorce, feels fulfilling both personally and professionally. At last, I'm finding the happiness I had been missing for so long.